Hi, I'm Steve Endo, and I'm a Microsoft MVP. Today I'd like to share a story about troubleshooting a Dynamics GP SQL posting error. This should be a very rare, exceptionally rare occurrence for you in a Dynamics GP environment, but it does occasionally happen due to various reasons. So I'd like to share a few tools and techniques that I and a friend used in order to troubleshoot this particular error. So here is the Dynamics GP SQL posting error that was occurring. And this was occurring when a user tried to post a GL journal entry batch. And you see on the first error message, it is a SQL error, something about a parameter not declared as an output. And then subsequently, there's a second error listing a SQL error number of 8162, which is essentially the same as the first error text. So that was all we had to go on in terms of the error. There's also some very important context that needs to be considered when these errors occur. And fortunately, the partner shared that an ISV solution was uninstalled at this customer, and that process involved replacing the modified ISV posting stored procedures with the original GP stored procedures based on scripts that were provided by the ISV. Additionally, a similar posting problem was encountered and resolved several months ago with the help of Microsoft Dynamics GP support. However, that was several months ago, and now this different error appeared unexpectedly. So while we thought the ISV uninstall and related problems at that time were somehow related to this error, we didn't have a specific tie to explain the cause of this error. So we used two tools to troubleshoot this error. First, I used a script to search for text in all stored procedures. This gave us an idea of where this problem might be coming from. We knew the specific error message, so given those keywords, we were able to identify some potential candidates that might be related to this problem. Second, we used SQL Profiler to perform a trace, and we used a customized template in order to gather the information that we needed. If you use any of the standard SQL Profiler trace templates, you probably would not have enough information to identify the cause. So you have to use a customized or modified template settings in order to get the information you need. And lastly, a critical tool that you should always have if you're dealing with Dynamics GP SQL scripts is some type of SQL formatting tool. I personally use Redgate SQL Prompt, which has several different tools and features that are very, very handy time-saving features when I work with SQL Server Management Studio. However, there are many other tools out there that include SQL formatting as part of SQL Server Management Studio. Or if you're working on a customer server and you can't install software there, you can always copy and paste SQL from that session into the web-based tool called sqlformat.org. And that's just a website. You paste the SQL in, and it will format the SQL for you. And that'll just save you a lot of time when you're trying to trace these type of errors and analyze Dynamics GP SQL. So with that said, let's cover the sleuthing that we performed in order to understand what was going on with this error and identify the cause of the error. So here we have a Dynamics GP 2016 batch that has failed and gone to batch recovery. And that's because I've tested this previously to ensure that it fails and causes the error that we want. So what I'm going to do to demonstrate the error is I'll just select Continue, choose my posting journal destination, and you'll see after a few seconds this error occurs. And this same error would occur if this were a fresh batch that you were posting from the batch entry window. So we first get this error that the formal parameter corresponding unit was not declared as an output parameter, but the actual parameter passed in requested output. We thought, that's pretty strange. Fortunately, it's very specific, but we don't know what that means. So the debug button tells us, well, something to do with the batch posting engine. Obviously, it's a GL batch. Something to do with the distributions. It's unclear what might be going on here. So this information isn't terribly helpful. Next, we get this subsequent error, which is essentially the same thing, saying GLP post batch returned this particular SQL error, which is the one we just saw. Okay, well, let's try to figure out what might be going on there. And more info doesn't really tell you much. It's just saying that's a SQL error right there. So the posting fails, general posting journal is blank, so let's see what's going on. So if we go into SQL Server Management Studio, we saw that the error referenced GLP post batch. So let's take a look and see what that might offer. So once that script's out, I'm going to use SQL prompt to format the SQL. And you see we have 1,100 lines in this stored procedure. Great. So let's try to search for the corresponding unit parameter. So you see that corresponding unit is a field in a temp table here. So we see we're kind of in the right place, but we don't have it as a parameter. So what this tells me is that the parameter that we're dealing with is not actually in the GLP post batch procedure. It is perhaps a sub-procedure that is being called by this one. Now, we could try scrolling through 1,100 lines, trying to figure out what sub-procedure is being called, which one is causing the problem. But based on experience, that is a very tedious way to go about it. So let's abandon that approach and try something different. So here I have a script that I borrowed off the internet that searches all stored procedures for specific text. In this case, I'm going to search for that parameter name, IC corresponding unit, and let's see what comes up. And from this search, we see that there are 10 stored procedures that have this particular parameter name referenced. Okay, they all relate to posting. There's some related to allocation. There's history. There's account. It's not clear which one of these might be involved. So now that we have this list of potential stored procedures that may be involved with the problem, we had one additional valuable piece of information. And that was that the batch being posted had a journal entry that was posting to a historical period. Given that, we made the assumption that current year posting was not the problem. The customer was able to post the current year fine. This error only occurred when they tried to post to a prior historical year. So let's take a look at this one and see if we can tell what's going on. So we have GLP post to history year. So if we go in here, let's go ahead and script that out. I've already pre-formatted this one, but as you can see, it's 300 plus lines. And let's take a look and see if we can find corresponding unit. Okay, so we see that that is an incoming parameter, but it is not listed as an output parameter. So what does that tell us? We have a check if it's null. We then have it being passed into something else. And so this feels like a dead end. We see the parameters there, but it's not obvious why this error is occurring. So we see here that close history is being called and that it's being passed in as a parameter. But this is not specifying output as a parameter. So this particular stored procedure doesn't seem to be the problem. And that's about all we can figure out from this particular stored procedure. So after doing this a few times, this was not a fruitful approach. We thought we had a good idea as to where it was coming from, but with 10 stored procedures, we looked through all of them. It wasn't obvious what the problem was. So then we went to the last resort, and that was the SQL trace. There are a couple ways to get a SQL Server trace. I often default to SQL Server Profiler because it's what I've been using the longest, but you may be able to use a different tool. And one very important thing is to understand the templates that you're using in SQL Server Profiler, and this is often intimidating. So just for example, I'm going to use a trace template that I commonly use for Dynamics GP. And you'll see that it has stored procedure events and it has T-SQL events. I removed the security and the sessions and other things that I don't typically need. So with this trace profile, I'm going to start this and I'm going to reprocess my batch. Now I'm going to select my report destination, get that ready. I'm going to clear out my results, and then I'm going to proceed with the posting just to minimize the activity that I have. Now that the error occurred, I'm going to pause my trace. Okay, so that error has occurred, and we've captured the trace. Now, if I search for corresponding unit in these trace results, I see that it's referenced in a temp table, another temp table, and there is a cursor, and fetching from the cursor, and we have a GLP post account. And if we look down here, we should see there it is, corresponding unit. We don't have an output here. So this does not appear to be the cause. And this looks like a giant if statement. That's not it. GLP post to history year. There's corresponding unit. It does not have an output parameter. There's an if statement. So we determined that this was probably not as fruitful as we had hoped. So we were kind of stumped. But the partner had a different trace template. As a last resort, we tried that template. And I've kind of reproduced it here. Let me just open that template up. And I've called this Dynamic GP Full Trace. They used a different name for their template, but a couple of differences. Number one, this one includes errors and warnings. So there are 3 error and warning options that you can choose. So I selected all 3 of those events. The second very important option to include is the object name. Now, interestingly, object name does not appear for errors and warnings, so you have to select it for the stored procedure events. So I selected all of the object names for the stored procedure events, and those were the 2 changes that I made to this template. And so now I'm going to do a new trace, and I'm going to select my Dynamic GP Full Trace, and I'm going to get this ready, prep it to post, start my trace, click OK, capturing the error, click on pause. Okay, so now same process, but we had 2 different things in our SQL Server profiler template. So now if we search for corresponding unit in the text data column, we see that this create table, that's a temp table, same one we saw before, and create line items. That's a cursor. So some of the same things that we're seeing. And I was going through here thinking this would not be fruitful, but with patience, look at this. This trace template includes errors, and this allows us to see exactly where the error occurred. So this error looks very familiar. It's exactly what was displayed on the Dynamics GP posting error dialog. Formal parameter, corresponding unit, and the second very important item that we added to this template is the object name. This is the stored procedure that is being called when this error occurs. So we see here GLP post to history year. So that told me, aha, that is what is causing our problem. So this GLP post to history year value helps us narrow down the cause, as this is the stored procedure that is actually making the call that is triggering the error. Now, if we go to this specific statement, we see that GLP post to history year is trying to call GLP update history transaction. Interesting. And so somehow this call is causing this error. So let's take a look at what is being sent in. Well, that's kind of strange. Even though this error is showing that the I corresponding unit is having a declaration error, we don't see corresponding unit included here. So the call to GLP update history transaction is not even including that parameter. So let's take a look and see what is going on in GLP post to history year when it makes this call to GLP update history transaction. So I'm just going to copy that, go into Management Studio, and we're going to script out post to history year again. And I'm going to search for GLP update history transaction. So here we have that call, and I don't see any parameter for corresponding unit. That's very strange. So what I did was I went to my GP 2016 Fabricam company and I reviewed that original stored procedure. So here we have GLP post to history year, and that is when I found this. My stored procedure had corresponding unit in between period ID and error state. But if we go back to the one that the customer had, they only had period ID and error state, no corresponding unit parameter. So what we figured out was the posting store procedures that the ISV had provided to uninstall their product and restore the core GP default store procedures did not include this parameter. And when you remove this parameter, what happens? Well, error state gets passed in here as an output parameter, and the receiving stored procedure here, in this case, update history transaction, saying, wait a minute, I'm expecting this to be corresponding unit, but you're telling me that you want an output parameter in that place. It doesn't know that the name is wrong. These are just arbitrary names in terms of the stored procedure. It just sees that it is now receiving for this parameter an output request. And that's why SQL Server is throwing that error. Now, strangely, SQL Server is not complaining that the number of parameters is incorrect. I don't know if that's the case of this being an output parameter, it's kind of optional, or what, but that's what threw us off. We were looking for corresponding unit to have an output parameter in one of these stored procedures, and that was not the case. It was really that this was missing, so therefore this was being sent in its place. And SQL Server errored out on this before, presumably before it could tell us that we had a mismatched number of parameters being sent in. So I was able to script out this original stored procedure from GP 2016. We were able to run that procedure against the database, and once we had restored that corrected parameter, the batch was able to post successfully. So that was a winding journey in order to discover the cause, but fortunately we had a couple of key tools that we were able to use, and we also had a lot of context to understand what might have caused this problem. And fortunately, it wasn't an upgrade error, it wasn't a dexterity error, it was just a SQL Server stored procedure error due to changes to the stored procedures. We kind of knew that, we just didn't know where exactly the problem was located. So that is an example of how you can use those tools to track down a Dynamics GP SQL posting error. Well, I hope you found that useful. If you're interested in more, you can follow me on Twitter at SteveEndo or check out my blog at blog.steveendo.com. Thanks for watching.